Welcome to Deployed. I'm Dennis with my co-founder Ivo, and everyone in our industry is selling AI as the answer to customer experience. So for our guest today, on this episode, we brought in someone who spent 20 years telling management teams that their problem isn't their people, it's their processes, and who is deeply allergic to buzzwords. So Horst Remes, managing partner at One Stone in Ghent, engineer by training, former sales director, 20 years in customer-centric strategy, 3 international CX awards for business transformation and complaints handling, as a keynote speaker and focusing on the myths of a customer experience. He also warns us that he's a CX expert, not AI expert. So, Horst, welcome to the show.
Very happy to be here, Dennis.
100%.
Yes.
Would you mind give us just a little bit about yourself for anyone who doesn't know about you and 100% should?
All right. Basically, I fell into this expertise, right? I was in sales. And what we saw is that our sales didn't go as smoothly as it used to. And that was because the product actually didn't sell itself anymore. Before that time, we just had the best products and nobody could touch us. But that was no longer the case. That was around 2000. And so we needed the whole transformation to be able to still sell stuff. And so the one thing that we could then rely on was, okay, if other suppliers that are maybe less close to the customer can beat us on products, maybe they can't beat us on customer centricity or on customer experience. And so I went through a whole change process with my team. And I was so fascinated by the subject that after we completed that, I said, this is what I want to do the rest of my life. So that's how I came into this, and I joined the startup as a co-founder. We sold that startup to a bigger consulting firm, and then about 14 years ago, I left that bigger consulting firm again to found One Stone with one of my co-founders. So that's
fantastic.
That's what got me here.
Absolutely, and
Very nice.
I did have the pleasure to meet you in person. We met at the CX Summit in Lisbon earlier this year. And as I said right before we started shooting, I genuinely was blown away with some of the examples, how easily you conveyed some important frameworks and perspectives around customer centricity, which sometimes it's not easy to measure or to explain. And I know you have a big vision, or you discuss a lot the customer centricity myths, right? What are some of those myths around customer centricity, or the most pronounced ones that you see more often come up?
Well, the one that I encounter the most, and actually it's my favorite because it's so wrong, is that customer centricity is a matter of attitudes. And so we see that very often. I often see it like written on the walls, like CX is not a department, it's an attitude. But think about what you're doing as a manager. If you say that, you say, okay, we have broken processes. Some things are not working for our customers. And if they need to get help, we rely on the individual efforts, on the individual smartness, customer orientedness of individual employees to compensate for our broken processes. Okay, for some people that works. Some people do that. The problem is those are the people that get frustrated. And because the process is never repaired, they all constantly have to fix that broken process, and they leave. And you're left with those people who can't do that. Not with the super men and women are the ones that you rely on, but you're left with mostly just ordinary people like you and I. I'll speak for myself, like me. And then they just can't do that all the time. And we have to run a business with normal people that do a good job. Yeah, that's true. But we can't rely on people to constantly fix things that are not designed in the right way. And that is, I think, basically my biggest plea in that keynote also.
So what you're saying essentially is that from your experience, you're seeing that a lot of companies try to or have to compensate with their team's effort for the lack of processes that are actually uh, by design created to make it customer centric,
Yeah,
essentially.
exactly. Yeah, that's essentially what's happening. And it's like there's a great quote from Deming, right? One of the pioneers of the post-war Japanese industry success. Said like a good employee will always lose from a bad process, and that's often what's happening. We haven't designed the process, or we have designed it in the wrong way. And if we do that, the last guard for customer experience that's still standing is that employee, and that's just not sustainable. And also it doesn't work, and because you see that there's a very big difference between organizations that have their processes figured out and the ones that haven't. And they're not always perfect, but there's already a big difference between people who have been thinking about them and people who have not, who leave them to coincidence. And then the ones who have been thinking about them sometimes have designed them in such a strange way that people just can't work with them. So that's also one of the things that we do as an organization is we make sure that that we design the processes in a way that they're psychologically easy to work with, and that's what we call psychology design. And so make sure that a human can can work with a process, and I think that's extremely important. And you see, for instance, just to make it less abstract and to give a very concrete example, for instance, a complaints process is a very good example because it's very often designed badly. So what happens? Somebody has a complaint or a problem that needs to be solved, and they get in touch with an employee who needs to solve that problem. But very often already, they get in touch with one employee, they can do the story, and next time, if the problem is not solved, or if they have more information or whatever they figure out, they talk to somebody else. That's
Mm-hmm.
already an issue.
Yes.
But even if they would talk to the same person, what does this person need to do? This person needs to, they're usually not the experts, the subject matter experts. So let's say in a bank, a wrong payment happened. Well, that employee in the complaints department is usually not a payment expert. So they need to rely on a fraud team or a payment team to solve the problem, or at least to find an answer to the question. Those people are not incentivized to help the complaints department to find answers. They're incentivized to do other stuff. And so if they help the complaints department, they actually work against their own incentives. And they spend some time to help a colleague, but it's pure goodwill.
Mm.
And you see,
Yeah.
if it's not designed, this is what has happened. And
There's an alignment.
people or organizations who think better about such a process, what they will do, they will make sure that there are specialists who are incentivized to solve those issues. And also what they'll do is they'll catch those issues. And if they happen too often, they also make sure that they prevent the issue from happening next time. And that's also something that is very often broken in organizations.
Yeah, I recognize that actually from when I started working full time myself. I was working on IT service desk. Very comparable. So I did the first line incident management, but as soon as I had to hand it off to someone else, it was very clear that they didn't really care, to be honest. If the process wasn't there, they didn't care. They would do it in their time whenever they want. So my first experience with that was with a very small IT company, only 6 employees. And because of that, we could still manage to do everything because you know everyone personally. But later, I started working in a little bit bigger company called Nike. They have a little bit more processed working, and they were using a framework like ITIL. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Yeah, that's it's a specific framework for IT. is there like a specific framework that you are implementing there as well? Like, for example, for ITIL, they have a very specific framework how to use incident management, how to use problem management, all those specific things. Are you implementing a specific framework, or is it just very custom,
No, we're not.
seeing what works?
We're not, and more or less on purpose, because what you need is a one-size-fits-all. And that is also dangerous. Why is that? Because what it does, it makes you into a gray organization, right? You don't stand out. You can't, if you implement a framework, you're just like all those companies who implemented that framework, who may be already better than the ones who didn't, but it doesn't give you the chance to show your own particular character and your DNA. And from a marketing standpoint, I used to be in sales. It's so much easier to sell a company that has a face, not necessarily a human, but a character, a brand, something that sticks out. And so, especially if that is a customer-centric brand, it makes it all the easier to sell. And so what we try to do is to find out, okay, why do you exist, right? Your 7 competitors, or maybe sometimes 50 or 700 competitors, they all do the same thing. So why does the world still need you? If there's an answer to that question, then we can design the process in a way that proves that answer every time again. And I think that's what a company needs to think about, right? Who are we? What is it that we're in this business for? And one of the very easy questions I ask often to boards or to board members that I'm discussing this with is, you have 2 customers and they're at a trade fair and they're talking about you. What would you like them to say? And if a third person enters that discussion, and okay, I hear you're talking about this particular company, and actually I'm not a client yet. Should I be one? And why? What is the answer they're giving to that question? And if the answer is 1, clear, and 2, also consistent, meaning those 2 people say exactly the same thing, then that third person will be convinced quite easily. And the problem is, you could ask those 2 people to exactly say the one thing, what you're very good at or what makes you different, but they won't. So you need to give them a story, something they find valuable enough to talk about. And they'll say, last time I had a problem and I made a mistake, for instance. I made a mistake. It was a total mess. Well, I called their help desk and this is what they did. And they got me out of trouble in 2 hours. That is a story, right? That is something that people will talk about. And so you need to give them that story. And in order to have that story, it needs to be remarkable enough. So that is one of the reasons why we don't like to use frameworks. Obviously, we do look at what exists and we also learn from that and sometimes steal from that a little bit. But we think the world is gray enough as it is. It doesn't have to be, the same thing doesn't have to be implemented everywhere.
Absolutely. It's actually interesting that you mentioned that. Of course, I think most people had at some point in life, just like you mentioned, a position at a company. In my case, I think similarly to Horst, I also have some knowledge in the telecom space. That was my first business. I worked as a service provider for the major telecom companies in Portugal. And going back to the incentives and the alignment, no AI back then, or at least publicly available. And we saw this thing. We were on the sale. I was on the sales side, 100%. I had my team that I was trying to sell the packages to. And we were the face, if you want to call it, in the moment of the transaction. And what would happen is we would sell everything that we could sell. So the marketing department would give us all the assets. This is what comes with fiber optic. This is all that comes included in the package. We would have the team trained on all these outcomes and features. We would sell them. But then between the moment of trust, the handshake, or the signature collection, all the way to experiencing the product, there are all these different steps. They had to first, the contract needed to get processed. We need to check if they had any financial troubles with that company, like in prior years. Then a technical team would need to be dispatched, arranged, so on and so forth. And a lot of times when things didn't go the correct way as they should, because life happens, who would they call? I'm not sure if I should have done it back then. But
who did they trust is the question, yeah.
We were mostly in the front line, the door-to-door space. We were doing phone calls, but door-to-door as well. So I would always, to the customer, say, hey, if anything happens, here's my personal number. That would mean a lot to them. And I would pick up the phone. The problem was not me picking up the phone. The problem was when they had a problem that needed to be solved, because I sold them something, I would escalate this to the regional team, say, hey, this customer, it's a problem and I need help. That's with the customer support department from the corporate. I was like, okay, how do we get there? Oh, you need to send an email. Email sent. It's been 24 hours and nothing. Oh, it takes some time. In the meantime, the client already called me 3 times. Then I would escalate. I would even in some cases try to interact in behalf of the customer. And to your point, incentives were not aligned. The corporate customer support was aligned with some objectives. Ours was to sell, but then the reality is the trust was being broken, and it wasn't necessarily because anyone was trying to do it on purpose. Everyone wanted to help the customer, but everyone had different incentives. So my question that I have to you is now, and this was back then when I would say processes were linear, logical, and somewhat simple. Now with AI, things took a big turn. So things are not as flat anymore. How do you see bigger corporations or bigger companies with sizable teams looking at this AI layer to embed it into already messy processes or lack of? Like, what are you seeing on that end?
Yeah, well, there is a big contradiction there. One is that AI is going to be the big equalizer. That means that good service is going to be the same for everybody. It's going to cost the same. It's going to be easy for everybody. AI will take a lot of the misery that we have today in communication and in filling the gaps. AI will do that. The problem is it will do that for everybody who can pay for it, who can afford it. So what's happening is we make those companies grayer again. They will look more alike. And that is the mistake that many companies make today when they're talking about AI. From what I'm seeing, is what they see is, okay, we will make our operation internally more efficient, and they're not looking at what they're doing for the customer. That's one. And if they're doing something for the customer, they're doing what everybody is doing. And the question is, okay, this is the big equalizer. So will that change anything? Well, they will invest a lot of money in AI. And the difference, they will not have a differentiator. The thing is, they cannot afford to not invest in AI because you know how, I mean, have you ever ridden in a self-driving car, in a Waymo or something like this?
Mm-hmm.
The first 10 minutes is completely amazing. And after 10 minutes is that normal. And exactly. For instance, I took in California, I took a Waymo on the way to a restaurant. Mm-hmm. And I took an Uber back. And I regretted it because the Uber driver, I ate a bit too much and I drank a bit too much. But the Uber driver was like just a bad driver. And the Waymo is always a perfect driver. When I go to San Francisco, I'll just use Waymo from now on. You see, so it's the first 10 minutes is completely weird, completely amazing. And after 10 minutes, you're used to it and you don't want to go back. So people will not have a choice. But apart from that, there is another opportunity. The organizations that will make a difference, what they will do is ask themselves, okay, why are we unique? How do we want to make the difference? What do we want those two people to say about us? And they will use AI to reinforce that. And that is a much smarter way of using technology in general. It's not only AI. Obviously, AI is going to be almost a new industrial revolution, and there's no way around that. It's probably the biggest change that I will see in my life. It will change a lot, but how it's used is recognizable from how other industrial revolutions have been used. And for instance, you see when CRM was introduced, I'm not sure if you remember that. Yeah, not so long ago, all the customer problems were going to be solved. We had one view of the customer. A customer could seamless go from one channel to another, right? We would know him. We would know what he wanted. We would know his individual choices. Well, how individual or how personal has service become? How easy is it if you search something on the website? Don't you have to explain that again to the person you call in the call center? Well, I've never had that somebody told me, well, I know you've been in this shop and you've been on the website and I have the answer to your question. No, I just had to start all over again. What we did use a CRM for is to make our internal processes more smoothly and cheaper. But we didn't think about how can we use this to make the customer's life better. So that is, I think that is going to be a big differentiator. So it's both. Yeah. It's a big equalizer for most of the companies. The ones who are not going to be smart about it, they will reduce cost and use AI to do so. And the smarter companies will think about their position in the market and will use the technology to reinforce that.
I think that's a hidden gem. What you just said, you said it twice already. I think like that is exactly bang on, which is even I have these conversations almost like daily. As we shifted our point of view tremendously from our first positioning was automating customer service. And I was like, that might not be a great idea just to automating because that's for companies inside. Like operationally, like that's fantastic for the business owner. But it's like, how can we make it more efficient while increasing the customer satisfaction, the customer experience? And what you touched on, which was, what do people say when you're not listening or when they are like at a fair? That is the most underrated ROI for most companies, which is things we can't track. There's no CSAT score, there's no NPS score, there's nothing that can track that. Unless we have a device that's spying on everyone, but that's like that, and that wouldn't be ethical. So on that, I think that's why so many companies have a problem with identifying, hey, we know we have a problem. We know customers are not exactly satisfied or happy. We have two options. One, we don't look at it, or we try to show the board that we are making something about it. But we can't justify sometimes some investments because customer experience, how would you measure it?
Yeah, and sometimes that's a problem, but I think the problem is a bit overrated. I've been successful in measuring the effects of the financial effect of customer experience quite easily, actually. The problem is there is a lag. You do an intervention, you change something, and obviously the return comes a bit later. Not always at the very moment. But actually, if you know your key figures in a company well, and you know your processes well, you can make the link. It's not rocket science. It's just financial management. You can do that in Excel. So it's often said, well, we can't track that. Why? Yes, you can. It takes some effort, and obviously it takes some good data, and that's also a problem because obviously sometimes the data is spread all over kernels here, there, and everywhere, and they're not connected. And so we have this fancy CRM system, but still our databases are spread all over the place. And so that obviously that is also a problem. But you said something that is extremely interesting, I find, and that's the link between efficiency and customer centricity. And that is a very interesting one because many people who are actually advocating customer centricity forget that customer centricity and efficiency always go hand in hand. if you want to be customer-centric, but you can't make it efficient enough, you will never be able to cope with it. It will never be sustainable. So it needs to be efficient. In the other sense, though, very often, if you design a process or an experience or a customer journey, call it what you will, it's all about the same thing. It's just the way the person who looks at it is different, but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's front stage, it's backstage. Yeah? It's about the same play. If you design your journey and your process in an efficient way, but also in a customer-centric way, so taking into account that the look is from outside in instead from inside out, then you will make it more efficient almost by definition. What happens often is that the process is not customer-centric, and then you get people who are unsure, who are anxious about things that didn't happen or happened and that they can't explain, and they start calling you or they start emailing you. And then what you have to do is you have to deal with an anxious customer, which takes a lot of time and effort and also frustrates your people. So that can't be efficient, can it? So the two go hand in hand. And I think one of the things that you just said is, okay, AI can help us do that. We have now very strong tools to do that. Only it will not do it by definition or automatically. If you think, okay, let's streamline things, let's automate things, then that won't happen. You need to think outside in order for that to happen. And that will be the difference between those players who use that new technology and that new reality wisely and the ones who don't. Well, one of the things I was also thinking about, which may be very interesting, is like I said, sometimes the databases are spread all over the place and we don't have good information. Also, we don't have good answers to customer questions because we haven't designed the process. Well, where is AI going to find the answer?
Exactly.
Right? If the process is not designed, it will find it somewhere. But what would the quality of that be? If it needs to find the answer across non-connected database, very often the customer key in different databases is different. So you can't link what a customer bought with why he called in for a question, even. Or if he didn't pay his invoice. A human can't do it. So how is AI going to do it?
That is one of the biggest challenges.
Exactly, yeah. That is one of the challenges we do see with our clients as well. Especially if they're in a specific niche and they're using older software that doesn't have any access to the internet, for example, or very limited, or they have to request access from the vendor. Can we please connect it with something else? Yeah, that's where we also see the biggest challenges for connecting it and making the AI smart enough to actually be able to handle all the customer interactions there.
And it doesn't need to be dramatic. If you're in that situation, that's not yet a problem. The thing is, are you now thinking of doing that better and designing that process better and designing it outside in? If you do that, you start to build up data very quickly. And that is the nice thing about AI as a tool. I'm not sure if you can, it's more a concept than a tool maybe, but if you think about AI can work very quickly with that data, right? So to help humans, to do things instead of humans. So when you start building up, when you design a new process, you design it well, and you start building up information about that process and you store it in the right way, you're quite quickly on your feet again.
That is the thing, isn't it? Which is, as you said, the answers will only be as good as the data. And we've seen the same. And actually, I have a question. As you were saying, these things were like lighting up some bulbs in my mind. And I want to ask you a question that it's specific about our product. And if you hate it, I want to hear it. Okay. So we've been analyzing for the past months how humans work with their memory, like how our human memory works. Because there's one interesting thing that we've noticed, which is very manufactured, which is with great power comes also great responsibility, the old saying. But if you ever played with ChatGPT or one of these models for long enough, you see that they know everything about you, or they have a good memory. But their answers get to the point where they sound and read artificial because they remember too much. This thing is like, they remember so many things. In our mind, we have this weird thing, which is we tend to have great short-term memory. We have like a pretty bad medium-term memory. And then we have good, eventful, long-term memory. We remember like big facts from the past, something that happened last week, like we probably don't remember anymore. But anything that happened like this afternoon, I will remember pretty well. So we are working on this project that we call net awareness, which is our vision is that one AI agent, again, because of data fragmentation, is way more powerful than having an orchestration of 300 different AI agents for each one of them for their use cases. It will break very quickly and data will be fragmented. But then the next problem that we had to solve was, how do we make it more human? Again, customer experience. How do we make it feel more human? Especially because we work with voice channels and text channels, but voice specifically. And we built this memory system ourselves that we are about to launch that works exactly like this. So if you interacted with NetAI, our agent, it doesn't matter which channel. It could have been an email, you could have called them, you could have texted them. It will remember everything top of mind from you, like the last couple interactions, who you are, your profile, again, the whole information from the CRM, whatnot. And it will use that contextually right on your next interaction. If you called in, but you already sent an email about making a complaint, it will know that that is probably a topic that you want to talk about. So we'll lead with that. On the other side, if you ask them question, no, actually I'm talking because I had some issues with the product that I bought from you 6 months ago. It has this memory that goes back in time and, oh, let me check. It will check it, bring it back to you, and oh, it's this. So my question to you is, would you say that have full context awareness of even long-term events, like, for example, company like ChatGPT do these days, which gives you everything, even things that you yourself don't remember or recall anymore, versus having a more of a human-like memory style, would improve or would actually not align with where AI is going in the customer service and customer-centric approaches?
I must honestly say I don't know. And I'm very curious now. I think it's a smart idea. Why? Because obviously, if a human gets too much information, they get information overload very quickly. So if an AI system helps me with too much information, I will not remember what exactly the issue is or what I need to do. So it can be very smart, but you said we want to make it more human. But I believe we're already there. And I think that's a very upsetting. But what I see is that at this point already, the evolution of the systems today, AI systems, just language models, can handle human emotions usually better than humans can. Already, we're already there. Mm-hmm. That's not something of the future. We're there today. It's scary, for one thing, but it's also encouraging because obviously we want to personalize our service, and emotion is a part of that. I can be angry, I can be frustrated, I can be worried, and if I do that with a human and I come across as too angry, that human will have a flight or fight response. AI doesn't suffer from that kind of hormonal injection in the brain, right? They don't get cortisol in their system. So the human will react defensively and I will get more angry. And I've tried to upset AI systems. It doesn't work very well. They stay patient. And the thing is, though, that sometimes there are convictions, and it's also some of those myths that exist in customer experience. There are some convictions of people that things should be just so. Just to give you an example, I've met an organization and they've organized their AI chatbot in such a way, if they get chatbot abuse, which you've probably heard of, people that get very angry to the chatbot because the chatbot is not doing what they're wanted to do because it's not capable of doing it, and going into loops and asking the same question over and over again. They get very angry and they start shouting in capitals and be rude to a chatbot. They introduced some kind of cutoff where they say, now it's enough. I will now interrupt this discussion with you, and you can get in contact with us again if you have calmed down. That is just the opposite of what is possible with AI.
Yeah.
I don't understand how that discussion took place in that meeting room and why they did that, but that's what they did. And so we have to make sure that we don't implement the shortcomings of humans too much into the AI, because we're using the AI to prevent the shortcomings of humans, to make us stronger as humans in service. So maybe that's also part of the answer there, is that sometimes we need to be able to focus on things that the customer will remember. And I think that's very smart. That being said, though, the customer will expect that something that happened last year and that he remembers, that also the system remembers that. They're a lot more patient. That we see that from research also. People are a lot more patient with humans than with machines. They think the machine can remember it easily. So if it doesn't remember it, it's just designed for not remembering it. And so I think the AI will have to be able to switch between the two. Now, one thing that I'd like to clarify why I say it's probably very smart, that is, I said you need to give those people a story to tell. The two people who are talking about you, they need a story to tell. If what they experience is complex, they won't have a story to tell. So I think for that reason, that may be very smart. So I would have to see it in action and see how people react to it. So I have totally no experience with it, and I'm very curious about. So I want to be in touch with you about that and see how the first trials go. But so therefore, it could be extremely smart, where you say, "Hey, I'm not going to talk about all those things that we've already talked about in the past and that you may not even remember. And I'm certainly not going to make you remember a complaint that you had in the past. And I'm definitely not going to make you remember all the complaints that you had in the past. Or you may have forgotten about them because we've been doing things well in the last year."
Exactly. And not to expand too much into that, but just to add 2 cents to that, what we are seeing more and more is, as in general, the daily consumer tools get overloaded with memory. What they like is context. Like, I don't share everything with the model. Like, life happens. They can't record my life. They only record when I'm interacting with it. So what happens a lot of times is, for example, last week when I was doing some prep for today's podcast, I wanted to, of course, go a little bit beyond. Now, knowing how I usually interact, it would not only do that, it built me a dashboard with information that I could use. And I was like, I don't need all of that. And then I was like, hey, some interesting talking points that I could illustrate to bridge some topics. Then it would bring information that is no longer real. Like, life changed, and yes, I did things in the past that are not relevant for me for a discussion today. And this is what we see, like, it's very hard to bring context into business to customer conversation when we can't record it. So the only thing that we can record is events and interactions. But it's definitely a fascinating topic, at least for us. And that's what I wanted to hear.
There is one thing that actually touches on that also, is that sometimes too much information is creepy. And we see that happening now already, not only in AI systems, by the way, but in several other automations also, is that sometimes the system remembers things that are not so relevant in this context, but it still mentions them. And yeah, that may be scary. For instance, I checked a few days ago. I wanted to make a comparison. I just took an agent going on the web to have objective comparison about smartwatches and to measure my heart rate and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it said two things, and one was interesting and one was shocking. One was, since my sports is fencing, and it says, this is the comparison, but since you're a fencer, this may be easier to wear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, totally relevant. It knows
Yeah.
that I'm a fencer from the very beginnings of me using the system, which is probably 2 years ago. But I looked up something about fencing. Okay, fine. That's totally relevant. It also
Useful.
said, but because you have a high blood pressure, that may also be, and that is something I don't even remember discussing that with any AI system.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's creepy.
that is creepy. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think
That is the thing.
that may be a good use case for something like this is
Exactly.
making sure that what you're talking about in this conversation with the client is all relevant for that client.
Exactly.
Yeah, that is actually something that we did. How we are starting to build this net awareness. Like, we are starting with very small facts at first, because we know exactly this could happen, that it will mention things that are completely irrelevant. So when we are starting to roll it out, it is really only the last conversation for now, because
Yeah.
we are very aware of exactly this danger.
But this is a topic that we could definitely keep going for hours and days.
Yeah.
Before we wrap it up, Horst, I would love to ask you one question for anyone that is listening, and you as an expert in customer centricity. What would be your advice to a company that's right now evaluating AI deployments to help their customer service and to become more customer centric? What would be your biggest advice?
First, think about the journeys or the processes that are most relevant to a customer, and start with those. And most relevant are usually not because they occur the most. Most relevant is usually, this is an interaction that this customer will remember. And for instance, when every time emotion is involved, could be anxiousness or could even be a positive emotion. But when an emotion is involved, people will remember longer and they will remember better how they felt about an interaction. Those are the first candidates. And sometimes what we see is that AI is deployed on things that happen more often, obviously, because there's an efficiency gain to make there. But that is, if you do it for pure efficiency reasons, that's fine. But if you want to do something that makes your customer-centric position better and that contributes to your brand, then you need to think about impact rather than frequency first. And so you need to think outside in and say, okay, which interactions are going to have most impact? And obviously a complaint is one, because there's a lot of emotion involved, obviously. Things like errors, mistakes. For instance, a customer made a mistake and calls on you to get this mistake corrected. That is usually something that makes people very anxious, because they know you as a company have no incentive to do that. They made the mistake. So, right, if you make a mistake, okay, you may have the decency to correct it, but I made a mistake as a customer. How am I going to convince you to help me correct my mistake? Things like that could go a very long way. If you can use technology to do that in an efficient and a consistent manner, people will talk about that. So I think the first candidates, if your objective is customer centricity, if your objective is that, those are probably the first candidates, and they lay in sometimes very hidden corners. You need to analyze your interactions outside in to really understand what it is. And what I often see is that the monetary value of peace of mind is usually underestimated. Many companies make their customers feel anxious. Why? For instance, they say, okay, it's going to be solved. When is it going to be solved? Well, I can't promise you anything because I can tell you that because it's my colleague who will take that up, and I'm not sure what his agenda looks like. Well, you leave a customer anxious. When will this happen? Will somebody take it up? It's not you, so it's somebody else. What is this person's name? Well, I don't know. There's like 100 persons doing that. So I don't know who is going to take it up. I'm sending it to a mailbox. And so you lose trust immediately. If you can use technology to streamline those things and to make sure that you can tell a customer, this is the problem, it's going to be solved in 2 hours or in 2 days or in 2 weeks, whatever is a relevant and reasonable time frame. If you can make a concrete promise about something because you streamlined your process and your technology, the value of that is humongous. And because so few companies think about that, you can make a huge difference with it. And we've seen that time after time. If we work with a company who is successful in providing peace of mind, sometimes in very simple interactions, that already makes a huge difference because they don't get that anywhere else. So that would probably be my advice. I'll look for those emotions first.
That is it. Horst, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. Everyone, make sure to connect with Horst on LinkedIn. We'll leave the link down below. And stay tuned. He does amazing keynotes. Make sure to check it out. Again, thanks so much, Horst.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.